Good evening, everyone. We're truly glad to have you back with us tonight. There's something haunting about being alone on a bike miles away from the city, deep in the woods, with nothing but the sound of your wheels and your breath. Tonight, we bring you a chilling collection of horror stories from cyclists who encountered the unexplainable while riding. If you enjoy unsettling tales and late-night scares, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. You're watching Sleep Horror Stories. I never felt uncomfortable riding through the woods before. I actually enjoy the feeling of being surrounded by nature, far from the noise of the city. Just me and the trail for a few peaceful hours. But sometimes that peace shatters. Something shifts in the atmosphere, and your whole body tenses up. It's not logical, just a silent warning. And I've learned not to ignore it. This happened a few years ago. My friend Jake and I had planned a biking route through a national park in Oregon. It was a breathtaking place full of dirt trails, pine forests, and mountains stretching as far as you could see. We wanted to make the most of the day, so we arrived early and started pedaling, taking in the scenery. The plan was to get back before sundown. But like always, we got a little too confident. We didn't exactly underestimate the route, but we stopped to rest for a while, and time slipped away from us. By the time we noticed, the sun was already going down. The light between the trees grew dimmer, and the temperature dropped fast. At first, we weren't too worried. We knew the trail well, and even if it got dark, we had lights on our bikes. But in nature, things rarely go as planned. We were riding along without issue when suddenly, we heard it, a baby crying. We both froze. There was no mistaking it. It was loud, frantic, like a baby in distress. We looked at each other, confused. There shouldn't have been anyone around, let alone a baby. But the crying continued, coming from somewhere nearby, just behind the tree line. At first, we didn't say anything, just exchanged glances. Jake was the first to speak. He said maybe someone had abandoned a child, or maybe someone was in danger and needed help. And yeah, part of me wanted to ignore it. Every fiber of my body told me something was off. That sound shouldn't have been there. But what if it was real? What if there really was a baby, alone, waiting for someone to find it? We've all seen what some people are capable of. It wouldn't be the first time something like this happened. So we couldn't just leave. We had to check. The deeper we went into the woods, the louder the crying became. But we couldn't see anything, just dry branches on the ground and darkness thickening around us. The air felt heavy, like it was charged with something we couldn't quite explain. Still, we pressed on. Then suddenly, silence. The crying stopped. We stood still, scanning the woods. Everything felt wrong. There was no wind, no animals rustling the bushes. Just the echo of our own breathing and this growing sense of dread. Then the crying started again. Closer. Only a few feet away. And that's when we saw her. A woman stood behind some bushes, watching us, with a look that was both desperate and mocking. But what chilled me to the bone, she wasn't talking. The baby cries were coming from her mouth. My legs locked up. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as she smiled with twisted delight, and that unnatural baby wail kept coming from her throat. We'd been tricked, lured there like prey into a trap. Jake snapped out of it first. He grabbed my arm and whispered something. I didn't catch it. I was still frozen, watching that woman slowly rise from the bushes, her dress filthy, covered in strange dark stains. We knew then we were dealing with something evil. Then, without warning, she charged at us. I didn't think. I just ran. I jumped on my bike, barely getting a grip before Jake was already pedaling ahead like a madman. I could hear him yelling, and behind us, heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to know how close she was. I just pedaled, hard, faster than I ever had. The cold air stung my face, and the path seemed to narrow more and more. I don't know how long we rode like that, but eventually, the sound behind us faded. We reached an open part of the park. The trees thinned out. And finally, we stopped. Our legs were shaking, our lungs burning, and that's when we saw him. An older man on horseback. He looked at us with a strange expression. Not surprised, just tired. We must have looked like lunatics, out of breath, wide-eyed, adrenaline still pumping. He asked, almost scolding, "What are you boys doing out here this late?" We couldn't even speak, and then he said something that chilled us even more. "You shouldn't be here at this hour," he said. "There are sounds out here that speak to you, but they're not what they seem." I finally managed to breathe. Jake and I exchanged a glance. Then I asked, "What's in this forest?" The man looked back toward the trail we came from. After a long pause, he said, "Witches. Some hide in the day, others wander at night. They lure, they trick, they mock. Sometimes they only scare. But sometimes they don't." We didn't say a word, but the question was all over our faces. "Was that a witch?" I finally asked. He nodded without hesitation. "They use human voices, pretend to be children, old folks, anything to make you come closer. But you were lucky," he said. "They don't always let people go." My throat went dry. I didn't know if he was trying to scare us or telling the truth. But in that moment, everything he said made sense. He told us to leave, to get back to town and not stop for anything. He didn't have to say it twice. We took off and didn't stop pedaling until we saw the lights of the first houses. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't know if it was really a witch or it was something worse. But no one can mimic a baby's cry like that. No one just vanishes into the woods like they were never there. I never rode in that park again. I never want to be in that darkness again, with something calling out to me. Whatever that woman was, whatever she wanted, if we'd taken just a few more steps, we might not be here to tell the story. Ever since I was a kid, biking has been my escape. I'm no professional cyclist or anything like that, but I've always loved riding the dirt trails around my hometown. Not many people live here. Most of us know each other by sight, even if we're not exactly close. That's why, when I saw a familiar face that night in the bushes, I didn't doubt for a second that it was him. And that made it all way more terrifying. I like riding in the early evening when the heat dies down and everything feels calm. There's a gravel trail on the edge of town I've biked 1,000 times. I know it like the back of my hand. I could probably ride it blindfolded. That night, I was heading home after a couple hours of pedaling. No wind, no weird sounds. Just the crunch of gravel under my tires and the occasional chirp of a cricket. As I approached a narrow stretch lined with brush, I heard something strange. A rustling, like someone or something moving through the bushes. But there was another sound too, wet, sticky like chewing. I hit the brakes. My first thought was maybe a stray dog or a coyote had found something to eat. But no, there was something else. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like whatever was in there was listening to me too. I pulled out my phone and shone the light toward the bushes. It barely reached past the undergrowth, but then I saw it. Someone was crouched down over something. His face was smeared with blood. His clothes were filthy, and his expression, a twisted mix of hunger and rage. It took me a few seconds to realize who it was. But when I did, it knocked the air right out of my chest. It was a neighbor. He lived just a few houses down from mine. I'd seen him tons of times at the store, walking with his mom, even back in school. We weren't friends, but I knew him enough to know something was very wrong. And I saw what he had in his hands. The carcass of coyote, guts spilling out, fur torn open. And he was eating it with his bare hands. The image was so unreal, I felt my brain was glitching. Maybe he was high. Maybe it was a prank. There had to be a rational explanation. "What the hell are you doing?" I blurted out. He raised his head slowly, his eyes wide, breathing heavy. He just stared at me. But that look, that wasn't the look of someone in their right mind. There was no recognition, just hunger and fear. Every hair on my body stood on end. I bolted, jumped on my bike, and rode like hell, not looking back once. The trail back home felt like it would never end. But his face, his bloody hands, that stare, it all stayed stuck in my head. What the hell had I just seen? Was he sick? Having some kind of breakdown? Did he need help? I headed straight to his house to tell his mom. When she opened the door, I was out of breath and panicked. I told her everything I'd seen on the trail. But she just looked at me like I was crazy. "My son hasn't left the house all day," she said calmly. My heart started racing again. That couldn't be. I saw him. It wasn't some look-alike. It was him. Still confused, she walked to his room, and I followed, stomach in knots. She opened the door. There he was, sitting on the floor, playing video games with another kid. No blood. No sign he'd been anywhere near the woods. My mind went blank. But I know what I saw. He turned to me, confused, asked what was wrong, but I had no idea what to say. I muttered an apology, said maybe I made a mistake, and left. I got home and sat there numb. Over and over I tried to convince myself I imagined it. Maybe my eyes played tricks. Maybe shadows and fear had messed with my mind. But no, that wasn't it. I saw him. I'm sure of it. And even though no one else in town ever mentioned anything strange on that trail, I stopped riding at night. Because if that wasn't my neighbor, then what the hell was it?